Good evening, everybody. This is Scott Morganroth, and welcome to another edition of the Sports Exchange on the South Florida Tribune Broadcasting Network. We have a great show in store for you. First of all, I'm going to go over our guests, and then we're going to get to the first one. Ryan Skolrud will lead it off. He'll be followed by Anthony Wood. Mel Farr Jr. will talk about some NFL topics and the Atlanta Braves. And we welcome a new person to the program tonight. His name is Damon Knight. He'll go over some top headlines. With that said, Ryan, well, welcome back to another edition. We have a lot of good stuff in store, don't we, buddy?
Yes, we do. And Scott, thank you again, as always, for having me on the show.
My pleasure. Ryan, you're always a pleasure. So, let's talk about some fantasy football, all right? And you talked about McCaffrey's insane pace in 2019. Unfortunately, I go up against my brother-in-law that has this guy opposite of me. Oh, I hope he doesn't have a good week, but I wouldn't be surprised if he does. So let's talk about Mr. McCaffrey, Ryan.
Well, this is something that if for those of you who may remember in the beginning of the season or in the preseason, there was some talk with the Panthers coaching staff that made it into the news that there was a possibility that they were going to possibly limit Christian McCaffrey's his snaps and his carries near the goal line. He may lose some goal line carries just to kind of rest his body and keep him fresh throughout the season. That has very much not been the case, and here's some stats to go along with that.
Okay.
In terms of the running back Panthers snaps so far through 4 weeks, Christian McCaffrey has had 264 of the running back snaps. Reggie Bonifon has had 4 of the running back snaps, and everyone else has had 0. That means that Christian McCaffrey has had 98.5% of the snaps at the running back position for the Panthers. Now, that being said, so he's obviously not getting pulled at the goal line. Now we get into a little bit deeper. Currently, he is on pace for 344 carries, not touches, carries. 344 carries, 100 catches. If you put those together, that's 444 total touches. In 2017, I want to say, I believe that Le'Veon Bell finished with, I want to say it was 407, and everyone thought that was ridiculous, just how many carries, or just how many touches he had. Right now, McCaffrey's on pace for more than that. He's on pace for almost 450 touches, carries and catches combined. And then you look at the total yards. You think about a couple weeks ago when they got absolutely just stopped up, the Panthers did, by the Tampa Bay Bucks defense. I want to say Christian McCaffrey in half-point fantasy only scored like 6.5 points. Just was not a very good game for him. Even with that, he is on pace for 2,500 total yards.
Wow.
From 2,516. The NFL record was set by Chris Johnson when he ran for 2,000. He caught for 500 yards also that season. So Chris Johnson has the record in 2009, 2,509 yards. Right now, Christian McCaffrey is on pace to beat that by 7 yards. That's the kind of season that Christian McCaffrey is having. A lot of, I know I was one of many people that advocated for Christian McCaffrey to likely, especially in PPR-type leagues, to be the number 1 overall pick, even over someone like Saquon Barkley. This is the kind of use that shows why that is the case. So, again, it's just the stats that he is putting up are just absolutely ridiculous, and he doesn't seem to be slowing down. He hasn't really been slowed down at all from wear and tear over the last couple of years. He's had a lot of miles on the tires, even in college. It's just he is on pace for a phenomenal season. For those who are able to get him in the draft, well done.
All right, let me add a little something to these insane numbers that you just went ahead and gave me. Number one, you know who his workload reminds me of? I'll give you the initials a few years back. RW.
RW. How far back are we going?
Well, going back a little ways, which is probably why you won't get it anyways. That's where the old gray hairs come into play. So, the name is Ricky Williams, and he played under Dave Wannstedt, and that's why he didn't want to become the next Earl Campbell, and with a Walker and Canes, and that's why Ricky decided to step away, knowing that the usage was that much. And I know that Ricky Williams is the best running back that the Dolphins have had in many years. He really has. So, all I can.
Yeah, that and he liked weed enough that he didn't care if he didn't have to play football anymore.
Well, that's true. I mean, long before there was cannabis where it was legal, Ricky Williams got ahead of the curve and decided to do it anyways. But he didn't want to be like Earl Campbell. And my only hope for Christian McCaffrey is he doesn't get so beat up that we're not talking to him too much about him medically, which so many running backs have had to endure the punishment that they have had.
Correct.
So, I don't know. When you throw numbers like that at me, what do you think I'm going to say?
Yeah, I just looked up for sure. It was Le'Veon Bell had 406 touches in 2017, and what his big contract dispute, and he missed all of 2018. It was his franchise tag season, and he was afraid that that they were, with the franchise tag, that they were just going to use him up and just give him touch after touch after touch. He was afraid they were going to give him 450 touches.
Why don't you look up Ricky Williams' numbers in terms of carrying?
Let me pull up that real quick.
Yeah, I'd like to hear those. I mean, I think it's pretty good stuff. I know we have a few other things we want to get to, but you really brought an insane pace. Now we're going to get some insane numbers for those individuals that are listening, and then we'll go on to our next subject in a moment.
In 2003, he had, good grief. In 2002,
exactly.
He had 430 touches.
Right.
So that was, he had 380 rushes and 47 receptions.
Okay.
And then in 2003, he had 442 touches.
Right.
So it's 392 carries and 50 receptions. So yeah, he got used a ton as well.
Well, I just like the two words you just said, okay, Ryan? Good grief. End of story. Okay? That you just made my point for me. Thank you, buddy. Appreciate it. So with that said, let's go on to Mike Evans. His first 2 weeks were not going to be the norm. Explain what that means.
So here's the thing about Mike Evans. After the first 2 weeks, there was a lot of concern about whether or not Mike Evans was still going to be the guy and still produce the right numbers for fantasy. There had been a lot of hype about Chris Godwin in the preseason, and then when we hit into the season, Godwin kind of took off right off the bat, and Mike Evans struggled the first couple weeks. What people, I think, fail to realize is just how sick Mike Evans was those first 2 weeks. In week 1, he had caught a flu bug that apparently had been going around the Bucs camp, like a bunch of guys had caught it. And he just happened to catch it like 3 or 4 days before the first game of the season. They thought that he was somewhat over it, but he wanted to work through it and play in the first game anyways. And not many people caught it, but there were a couple video shots of him hurling his guts out on the bench while the defense was out there before he went back out in order to play offense again. So he was not right week 1. Week 2, kind of the same thing. He was still getting his strength back for the most part. Still trying to get fluids back. And then in week 3, what do you know? He blows up for 170, 180 yards and 3 touchdowns.
Right.
And then last week, still against the Rams, still has a solid week as well. Well, kind of overshadowed by Chris Godwin. However, over those first 2 weeks, he had the stomach bug, not feeling great. But over the past 2 weeks, week 3 and week 4, he's drawn 89 more air yards than any other NFL player. So in terms of catching the ball and total air yards, he is far and above 90 yards beyond anyone else. So he is basically right now, he is the best deep ball guy in the league. Period.
So how do you think
he's currently on pace for 140 targets? And in fantasy football, especially when you have PPR, half-point PPR, targets are huge because that's opportunity to catch more balls. This is the most targets he will have received at this current pace that he has received since 2016.
How do you think Chris Godwin's going to fare this week?
Oh man, who are the Bucks? I don't have the schedule in front of me. Who are the Bucks playing this week?
Aren't they playing the Saints? I believe, aren't they?
Yeah, the Saints. Here's the thing: that I think that Godwin can do pretty well. The main corner for New Orleans is Marshawn Lattimore, who he's mainly going to be shadowing, in my opinion, Mike Evans.
Okay.
The overall, I want to say that New Orleans is in the bottom 10, as in the worst 10 in terms of giving up fantasy points to the wide receiver position. And so, for the most part, wide receivers have done pretty well against the Saints offense. It's the run game that they have, or against Saints defense. It's the run game that they've done a really, really good job of shutting down. And so, while they did for the most part shut down the Cowboys offense, the Seahawks offense put up a whole bunch of points against them. The Rams obviously did pretty well against them. I would say Cooper Kupp had a phenomenal game against the Saints. So there are some weaknesses beyond after Marshawn Lattimore. There are some weaknesses in that defense in the secondary that will provide opportunities for guys like Chris Godwin to have at least a solid week.
Well,
maybe not necessarily putting up 38 points like he did this last week.
Well, you mentioned Cooper Kupp, so let's talk about him right now. You talked about a phenomenal comeback from a torn ACL. Go into that further.
Well, there was a lot of concern this year going into the season about Cooper Kupp having torn his ACL. I want to say in week 8 or week 9, whether or not he was going to be full strength coming back. I am one of the believers in Cooper Kupp, and here's why. I was advocating for him all in the off season. When he said he was healthy, I believed that he was still going to be the guy for LA. And the reason is he's never had to depend on his speed. He was one of those guys that in the combine kind of fell just a little bit because no one was really impressed because he had around like a 4.58 or 4.59 at the combine in his 40. Like, wow, he doesn't really have the breakaway speed. We thought he'd be better than this. His ability as a wide receiver has always been in his route running. You think back, here's a guy that you would know. You think back to guys like Steve Largent. Steve Largent wasn't the biggest, he wasn't the fastest guy. But he could run a route and hit sharp angles and get in and out of his cuts better than anyone. And that's kind of what Cooper Kupp does. Is he's not going to blaze by you. He can, in the end, get some breakaway speed, but he's not going to just from the get-go fly past you. He is going to make his cuts, get in and out of his cuts very, very quickly, and provide those open spaces for Jared Goff. Now, since Kupp has entered the league, he has been Goff's favorite target. Goff goes to him over and over and over again. Kupp is his security blanket in the slot.
Right.
And we've seen that the first 2 years, and we are now seeing that again that Cooper Kupp is back. So a couple of the things that have happened for Kupp is right now he is leading all wide receivers in terms of yards after contact.
Right.
So after contact, he has 109 total yards on the season. I want to say the wide receiver that led that last year was Juju Smith-Schuster with about 700 yards after contact. Cooper Kupp right now is on pace for about 410, 420.
Wow.
So that's a solid amount right there. And the other stat for Cooper Kupp is he is one of, I want to say, 6 wide receivers at this point receiving 20% of the target share for his offense. So.
Okay, well, let's go on to Chris Carson's great game.
Chris Carson, finally this year, in his 4th game, had a game where he didn't fumble the ball. There was a lot of concern, especially amongst fantasy owners. Okay, is Chris Carson going to lose this job to Rashad Penny? 3 fumbles in 3 weeks. Actually, I think it was 4 fumbles, 3 of them lost in 3 weeks. Is this really going to be, is Chris Carson going to lose this job? And the Seahawks have done a good job of reinforcing that Carson is the guy. He is going to be the one. And this last week, he was absolutely phenomenal. One of the things that really stuck out was the fact that he either caused, I think it was 21, either missed or broken tackles just